Welcome back to the Australian First Responder Foundation interview series. My name is Wade Norrie, and I'm the chair of the board of the Australian First Responder Foundation. These interviews, we aim to educate, inform, and inspire through conversations with key people in this space. The Australian First Responder Foundation is a charitable organisation committed to looking after the mental health and wellbeing of our volunteer emergency first responders, those who look after our communities. Today, we're truly honoured to be joined by our patron, Mr. Greg Mullins, AO, AFSM. Today, Greg will be interviewed by Marie McLeod, Director of Thrivability, expert in positive psychology, and a friend of the Australian First Responder Foundation. Greg Mullins is an internationally recognised expert in responding to major bushfires and natural disasters. He's coordinated responses to many major natural disasters over more than 2 decades and is retired Commissioner of Fire and Rescue, New South Wales. He remains a volunteer firefighter and is passionate about first responder wellbeing. We hope you will share these interviews with your own community and help the AFRF help look after those who look after us.
Welcome, Greg. Such a pleasure to have you with us today. That is quite a career. Greg, can you tell us how you came to be the patron of the Australian First Responder Foundation and why this is a cause that you care about?
Yeah, sure. Look, I was aware of the work of Louise Murphy, and so she did a Churchill Fellowship, and I'm a Churchill Fellow. So through that network, a friend of mine, Ian Crimmer, who I worked with for decades at Fire and Rescue New South Wales, he gave me a call and said, look, Louise would like to speak to you about this foundation. And in a nutshell, the rest is history, I suppose. I just think it's a fantastic initiative, and it's just such a vital area. And particularly with Black Summer, our bushfire season 2019-20, thousands and thousands of community members, volunteers, career firefighters, police, ambulance, SES, were really badly impacted. You know, some of them out fighting fires, lost their own homes, even lost family members. A lot of people in dangerous situations where they thought they might lose their lives. So that highlighted, I think, to the public the sort of things that happen on a smaller scale every day when responders are out there, and they need our help.
Yeah, beautiful. Does that make you feel in some way irritated that it takes a very big event like that to showcase to the public something that happens in an everyday way?
Irritated. I'm not sure if that's the right word. And I look back through my own career, and a lot of scars there, a lot of physical scars, but many more mental scars. And I've had my own journey with post-traumatic stress disorder, and it's a long journey and a difficult one, but not only for you, for the people who love you. But I think it's a shame that it's not better known because of the stigma that's still there, particularly amongst male emergency service workers, because I fell victim to that, I suppose, my own self-censoring when I knew really deep down that I had problems, but I wouldn't admit it to myself. And I think a lot of that's because it's just not out there. So in a way, it might be, I hate to say it, that anything to do with Black Summer, but a bit of a good thing that it's more out there, that, you know, human beings are human beings. And I remember when I did my first training as a peer debriefer in the early 90s, and the Jeffrey Mitchell model, and the quote, normal human beings responding normally to abnormal situations. And that stuck with me. And I thought, wow, yeah, that says it all.
I love that. Human beings responding normally to abnormal situations.
Yeah, and I thought back, you know, at the end of my career, and through my treatment, I had to list, you know, every fatality that I could remember, and I had no idea. I'd forgotten so many situations where, and and I just shut it down because it was too hard to deal with. So the way I dealt with it was just shut it down and put it in a box, but kept jumping out of the box. But I remember talking to other people about it, and they're just shaking their heads saying, "You what? You saw what? Well, there were dozens of us at that particular incident, or whatever. It wasn't just me." And yep, okay, stop minimising it. How did you feel, etc., etc. And it was a pretty difficult space to fess up to myself that maybe I hadn't handled things. The big tough guy, which is a real trap you can fall in.
And I guess it's a kind of layering, isn't it? If, as you say, normal human beings responding normally to abnormal situations, but when there are many of those, that the compounding effect over time, if you had one of those, and it might be able to stay in the box, or you might be able to process it over time, but it's the multi-layering, I imagine, over a career spanning time, that then makes it more and more difficult for those things to dissolve away in the way that you might like to think that they would.
Yeah, well, look, with me, how would I put it? I shut down a lot of my emotions because I just knew that bad things were going to happen, and I just had to get through it. And I remember the day I retired. It was just this. I was quite upset leaving my second family, Fire and Rescue New South Wales, just incredible men and women who, do incredible things day in, day out, but such a feeling of relief. It was like the world had been lifted off my shoulders 10 minutes after midnight. I woke up on the day I retired and I thought, that page is not going to go off. I'm not going to find out about a fire being killed or injured, or that's someone else's responsibility now. So, yeah, and it was accumulation over years. And the big thing for me was I felt that I couldn't face the loss of another one of my people. That's what got to me. It was too much. People who put themselves on the front line to help others, where they lose their lives or get seriously injured, that seriously affected me.
And so what keeps you going back? If you get to a point where you're so relieved that it's over, but yet, you keep going back. What's the why for you, and what do you think?
I suppose, if I come from a background of volunteering, of service, public service. Dad was in the public service, Mum was in the public service, my cousin, my uncles, it was, that's our thing, is serving and helping. If I'd have, through that black summer, I was on fire trucks and I was out, throughout New South Wales fighting fires. If I hadn't been able to do that, I'd be in a much worse place, because, yes, there were some triggers, quite a few triggers, some very dangerous situations, but I wasn't responsible. So it was that feeling of responsibility with me. And look, people in command positions would resonate with this. You are responsible and you feel responsible. And I would never accept, in terms of work health and safety, I remember people saying, oh, yeah, but it's a dangerous occupation. No, we can't even let that language slip into our organisation. It's not acceptable. Everyone goes home. That's got to be our mindset. And but yeah, it's so I didn't have that feeling of responsibility anymore, but I needed to serve. I needed to help and be out there.
So where is the tipping point then between something that is good for us? We know that volunteering and giving back and that service mindset that you describe is good for us. You know, it's really protective of our well-being. It brings meaning and purpose and connection to community, and we get to use our strengths to contribute to our community. Those things are fantastic. But did you in yourself, or do you notice in others where there is perhaps a tipping point where it's no longer serving us in terms of our mental health?
Look, most definitely, and I suppose it's different things for different people. And through the incredible treatment that I received after my, well, in the last year, I suppose, of being commissioner, and then following on from that and still ongoing, I recognised the triggers. I knew the danger areas for me, and I knew when I needed to seek help, and I knew when I needed to step back, because sometimes you just need to step. So it's that understanding, which is why the work of the foundation, I think, is so critical, is educating people about this is how it can manifest, these are things you can do, and here are situations where you probably need help, professional help. And I know, you know, all those years ago as a peer debriefer in the early days of critical incident stress work, we knew our boundaries. We were peers and we could speak to people and they could speak openly to us, but once we saw certain things, we had to refer on, or we could do more damage than good, because we weren't psychologists or trained counsellors.
So we'll definitely come back to that in a minute. I'm really keen to understand your role and opinion about that, the importance of that peer response. But for now, is there something more that you can say about recognising those signs in yourself and others? So those signs when you start to perhaps realise that there's a decline, or there's a need to seek help, or to stop and pull away, as you say. What have you learnt from your own experience and also observing others about recognising those signs?
Look, one of the things I've learned, it's different things for different people. And so there's no one size fits all. I've also learned that if you suffer from post-traumatic stress, you recognise it in others. I don't know why. I've had a lot of conversations and helped people go to get help, and where they didn't know what was happening to them. And it can manifest, you know, like I know alcohol abuse, drug abuse, that can mask, that can be self-medication. You know, I'm basically a non-drinker, and by choice. So thankfully that wasn't something that happened to me, but with me it was triggering situations, shutting down my emotions, no highs, no lows. So it is different for different people, and and I don't know what that thing is, but I had people coming to me late in my career as commissioner saying, "Are you okay?" And afterwards they said to me, "Well, we knew you weren't." And it was a colleague down in the ranks who said, "You need to go and speak to somebody," and I did, and it all sort of it all came out, and it was the lid came off the box and out jumped the jack, and couldn't get him back in. So it was a good thing. It was about time.
And when you look back on that now, would you, knowing what you know now, what would you do differently? Do you wish that you'd done that earlier?
Look, definitely. I said before, it toughed it out. And look, there's an old saying, leadership is an act from start to finish. You know, it's you're in a role, you've got stuff on your shoulders, lots of braid on your hat. You lead in times of crisis. You run an organisation day to day, but you have to be across it. And you can, you know, and people in command roles can get very captured by that and think, well, I can't let people down by showing weakness, which is a horrible thing. you know, with all my training, I thought that about myself. I'm showing weakness, and I wouldn't let anyone say that about another person, but I thought it about myself. And so it was actually a huge relief when I got tapped on the shoulder and someone said, you know, maybe you should go and speak to someone. Everyone else is getting well checks. You look after us. Maybe it's your turn. Oh, I'm too busy. Yeah, right. Off you go. And it was just a big relief. So yes, I wish I'd done that earlier, because the longer you ignore it or don't know about it, the harder it is to treat and to get your life back on track.
Yeah. And I'm sure that there was an impact not just for you, but on others in your life now when you reflect on that, would you say?
Yeah, definitely, because I shut down my emotions. So no highs, no lows, just sort of travelling along. I wasn't excited about anything. You know, we're going on a holiday. Oh yeah, great, we're going on a holiday. And my wife's a health professional. She knew and very subtly tried to move me towards things, but it, you know, was a tough, upsetting journey for her because she knew I was hurting, but I wouldn't open up. And I regret that. I really regret that, because it did impact on her in particular. But I, luckily, I caught it in time. Yeah. So.
Yeah, and that there's definitely people that I work with in that sort of situation where they become, as you're describing, numb or frozen. That sort of sense of not feeling all the feelings anymore. And what I observe is that then when you do seek help, there's kind of a thawing process where things, then it all comes flooding out. As you said, the Pandora's box opens and it's hard to get it back in. But the earlier that you deal with those things and being able to kind of recognise the early signs. And so I suppose that's why the Australian First Responder Foundation particularly interested in how do we kind of catch things upstream? How can we be more proactive so that we are knowing and doing things to keep ourselves well all the way through, and not sort of that ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, kind of as you're so beautifully describing the fallout of that. And so when you think about across the span of your career and people that you have observed who have been able to resiliently navigate some of those stresses and struggles, what have you observed works, from your own and perhaps observing others? What works well to stay well through this kind of difficult role?
Yeah, look, self-knowledge,
and
self-awareness. So knowing yourself, knowing when you're reacting in a way that's not how you would like or how you normally would react. Being able to reach out and feeling that you can speak to people either professionally or privately, having people you can confide in, and just talk things out. But communication is a real key, and again, a lot of it's one of the reasons I push so hard. One of the many good reasons I pushed so hard to try and change the gender balance in Fire and Rescue New South Wales, because when I joined in the late 70s, a lot of the officers were World War II veterans. They were tough men. They were all men. There were no women. The Act actually prevented women from even applying as firefighters. That changed, in 83. But they self-medicated, a lot of them, with alcohol. And they were just so damaged. It was so sad. And they were frightened to open that box, because there was no help. There was nothing in those days, and you can understand why. They'd be frightened of what's there. So, I look at my dad. There were things happened with his father, fought in World War I and was wounded on the Western Front, fought in Gallipoli and came back very damaged and was violent when he drank, and that damaged my father and, you know, helped shape my dad. And Dad couldn't talk about war. You know, he was in the RAAF during the war and thankfully didn't see a lot of action, but he just, when he thought of war, he thought of his father, and what a horror show that family was because of World War I. Yeah, I've gone down this sort of war scenario. That's a whole other thing.
The thing was about the gender balance. Was that?
Oh, sorry, gender balance. So
yeah.
there wasn't a culture of communication. It was command and control. There was no management style. They didn't manage. They weren't allowed to manage. There was no devolution. It was all up, and the people in the fire station on the trucks put wet stuff on the red stuff, and that was their job. And they gave orders and told people what to do and shouted at each other. And so if you had something wrong, you know, and I saw people being told they were weak because they cried at an incident, had tears in their eyes or something because some kids had died. Wow. And you quickly learn, well, you don't do that. And these tough men who'd been through war, I know now their emotions were shut down and they weren't going to let anything in, so they were tough. And if you showed emotion, you were weak. And that, so in it, I don't want to stereotype, you know, women are better communicators than men. Some are, some aren't. But generally speaking, I think there's, you do have a lot more communication where there's men and women in a workplace, and it's made a difference. Haven't gone nearly far enough, but it's that's one of the huge benefits of diversity in a workforce, not just gender diversity. Have different people and get the conversations happening, and then you're probably more likely to have issues come up at an early stage and then get people referred on.
Fantastic. That's a great example about why that diversity matters and why we need to continue to kind of fight against what I think we call toxic masculinity, you know, that kind of notion that, you know, men don't cry and men have to tough it out, and men, you know, don't go to the doctors, and as you described it as well, feeling that sense of I need to look like I've always got it together, and that sense of weakness if I don't. And how damaging that is for you, but also if our leaders are never showing any cracks, then what is that saying to us? You know, so, you know, I don't know if you have any reflections about that now in terms of if you were to have your time again, the ways in which you could role model that sort of, you know, showing that it's okay to not be okay. Yeah.
Look, one of the things I tried to do when I became commissioner in 2003 was open up. You know, it was very much top-down management. My predecessor, Ian McDougall, Vice Admiral Ian McDougall, ex-head of the Royal Australian Navy, he did an incredible job modernising management and really set the scene for me to do a lot of culture change in Fire and Rescue New South Wales. He did a lot of the hard yards, and part of that was saying, hey, leaders can make mistakes. And I actually remember a few months after becoming commissioner, I don't even remember what the issue was, but I got it quite wrong. And I sent an all-staff email apologising to the workforce saying, look, this happened, that happened. It was about an equipment issue and we'd got it wrong. The organisation got it wrong. And I said, I now understand, thanks to everybody who provided me direct feedback. I really appreciate that. I don't care what rank you are, where you work, whether you're uniform, non-uniform, please let me know. If I ever get things wrong, I'll fix this. And I got overwhelmed with, wow, that's fantastic. You know, you mean person with stuff on their shoulders can actually be wrong? Well, yeah, we're human. But then the phone rang, and it was a senior officer who was quite a bit older than me and told me that I'd just ruined the fire brigade, that you've just admitted that the chief can be wrong.
Wow.
You have to stick with your decision. So I said, what, even if they hurt people, are they wrong? Look, if you make a decision, you're just babysitting that role. You're babysitting those pips on your shoulder. You'll be gone and no one will remember your name in a few years. And how dare you, what was it, lower the standing of senior officers in the eyes of the workforce. I said, well, we're going to have to agree to disagree. I think I actually just raised it, but I'm me and I make mistakes. And it was trying to change that culture, but that helped get people communicating because they knew they were allowed to question respectfully. We had to jump on some people who weren't because that was unacceptable.
How much has that culture changed, do you think? Obviously, your predecessor and yourself began with a strong intent around changing the culture, allowing people to feel like it was okay to not be okay, it's okay to make mistakes, it's okay to put your hand up and say, I'm struggling. How much of that culture change do you think has occurred, and how far do we have to go?
Look, I liken culture change to boiling a pot of water.
Mm-hmm.
You can't turn the stove off because as soon as you do, it gets cold and stops boiling. Mm-hmm. And I'm not the best person to answer that. The best person to answer that is a female firefighter at Broken Hill Fire Station, or a clerical assistant at the zone office in Port Macquarie, or or a young Aboriginal firefighter at Sydney Fire Station. They're the people who know what the culture really is like. And I think at the top of the organisation, often you don't know. You hope to, like hell, that it's filtering down and things are overall improving. So I hope they did. And I had a lot of feedback to say that things were much better. I know there was much more open discussion and involvement, but it's still a rank-based organisation, very hierarchical. And when you go into battle, bang, it's a hierarchy and the person at the top calls the shots. But what we tried to do is say that's for 4% of the time. The other 96%, when we're doing training, community safety work, etc., you don't need to be that rigid hierarchy. Let's listen. People have ideas, and the way we always did things is not always the best way, particularly with regard to mental health. But look, what I did see was an opening up of people saying, yes, we have problems, in the organisation, even with our insurers. We had to have some frank discussions with our insurers because, at one stage in our history, I think the focus was on reducing workers' compensation costs rather than making people well. And our human resource staff were fantastic, and health and safety staff. We had these discussions with the insurer, and they went, "Yep, fair enough." And we actually reduced costs by being more proactive and saying, "Yes, this is a problem. We have to help people." So
there's still, I guess, as you say, regardless of work being done, it's something to be constantly vigilant about for those people who are in positions of leadership, whether that be in an organisation or a volunteer organisation. So how important is it then that there is obviously many factors here? There is the culture of the organisation that you are part of. There is your own internal resources and abilities to observe yourself and keep applying sort of self-care. But then there is also this other factor of how first responders support other first responders, those people who you are kind of shoulder to shoulder with day to day, who, as you so beautifully described, become like family because you're out there sort of in life-threatening situations with each other. So how important is it, do you think, in regards to mental health, to have that sort of peer responder approach?
Look, absolutely vital, because the first people to see that you're struggling are the people sitting in the back of the fire truck with you. And they know you, they probably socialise with you. So it's vital that people on the front line recognise the signs. And they won't always recognise it in themselves, and I'm a prime example, but you'll recognise it, you know, in Julie next to you, or Dave, or and to have those conversations, to have the tools and the skills. And it's not very technical. It's saying, how are you? Yesterday was Are You Okay Day? You know, and I made quite a few calls and spoke to people, and I got a few calls, and it was really nice. And I thought, gee, people do care. It's about being human, you know, being a caring human, and saying, how you doing? Yeah, you know, that was really tough, that job we went to, and gee, I felt pretty upset. How did you feel? And then, you know, it can be that simple, being a nice person.
Yeah, and so there's the asking, isn't there? But then there's also the encouraging for an authentic response that goes beyond fine, thanks.
Yeah, I'm okay. I'm okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so it's, and that can be difficult, getting past that. But if you really care, you'll stick with it, and you'll have those deeper conversations. You know, what did you think? What did you feel? What did you and get to the point. Well, you know, again, I go back to when I was a debriefer. It was important not to go beyond your training and think that you're a psychologist, or there's a little doggy.
It's just
yeah, but getting to a point, and I do this with people now. Say, look, you know, I can keep talking to you, and hey, let's stay in touch. But here's a phone number. I really think you'd benefit from having a talk to a professional who can give you some options and just talk you through some things, because I'm not really across, you know, the latest how to deal with this. But yeah, if you're waking up every night with a nightmare, no, that's actually not normal.
So one of the key roles of a peer is to notice what you might not notice yourself, because you know each other so well, and you can notice those early warning signs, but also perhaps you are more likely to accept that from someone who's walked the walk, rather than someone else who's kind of walked a mile in your shoes. And so do you think there's something about that advice coming from a peer?
Oh, look, definitely. And I remember when I became a superintendent, I said I'm going to leave the program because you've got fixed numbers, and so I'm keeping someone else out. But I'm no longer a peer for a person in a fire station, because they'll see my rank and they'll close up. And it's vital to have somebody who isn't threatening in any way, who you can just have a conversation with. You know that it's confidential, and it'll be okay to open up. And when we first launched the program, I think it was 1990, it might have been 91, but I remember, you know, there was cynicism at first, but we got out to fire stations doing education, telling people what it was all about, and then people would just sidle up to you and, oh, can I have a chat? And they'd say, yeah, let's, and side chats, and then say, right, you want to catch up for a coffee tomorrow? Yeah, I'd really love that. And it became okay, because you're a fiery just like me, you know. And I had people saying, I don't want to talk to my wife or husband, or yeah, they wouldn't understand. Well, they probably would, but anyway, we won't, you know, yep, but I'm happy to speak to you. So the conversation started, and it became okay. And to say, you know what, back to that normal human being having a normal reaction to incredibly abnormal situations, you know. And I come back to, you know, when I had to list these things and go back over them, they're just bloody horrific, you know. No one's meant to see stuff like we see. And, you know, and I just compartmentalised them, and then my brain was trying to deal where to file this. I've got no reference frame to, so I'm stuck, and so I'm going to wake you up at night and until you start to do something about me and work out where you're going to file me. So it was, but, and you know, other firefighters, you could have those conversations, and it made it okay. Yeah. So it's just vital that peer concept is really vital.
And that sense of safety that you describe, that is just there with someone else that's done the job alongside you. And another approach that the Australian first responders use is the opportunity for people to be able to pull back and go to a retreat where they kind of reflect and reframe and reset. Do you think that that's also a part of this kind of more proactive response where we can kind of pull people out and have some of these discussions before it gets to a crisis point?
Oh, look, definitely. And again, going back to the early 90s, we had the Jeffrey Mitchell model. Jeffrey Mitchell was a paramedic in the US, I think, and he did a PhD in psychology, but he brought in this peer debriefing model and group debriefs. And we found very quickly that it didn't really work in Australia, the group debriefs. So you go there, and I remember one in particular, it was a country fire station that had a hostel burned down for disabled people, and they were basically locked in, and I think 11 people lost their lives, and they knew these people, and they were just traumatised. But so these hotshots from Sydney came to speak to them. They didn't know us, and we're, you know, they've got family there as well, and it just flopped. But it was one of our, and it was, so then, you know, over time we said, no, culturally, one-on-ones are better. But then over time, so over retreat, where, you know, it's confidential, we're all here for the same reason. We're getting educated, we've got time to get to know each other and to relax. I think it's a fantastic concept. I'm really interested to see how it rolls out, because I think it's going to be revolutionary. I just, so, you know, putting aside that very American sort of model of how to do things and not translating, this is a new approach that I think can be incredibly beneficial, and I think you'll have prophets go forward from there to tell the masses, hey, you know, this is what I've learned. Let's have conversations. Hey, and if one of these comes up, you really need to be on it. So I'm very enthused about the whole idea, and fascinated to see how it goes.
Well, that's fantastic. I know that they've been thwarted somewhat like the rest of us with COVID, and that the first retreat has been pushed back a little bit, but certainly we would encourage people to get in touch if they're interested. It sounds like and it's a really homegrown approach, this, you know, this is grown from Louisa's research of going to a number of countries and pulling the best research and best sort of case studies from elsewhere, but growing it here and co-designing it with first responders so that it is that sort of best fit. And the idea, I think, is to kind of learn and grow alongside that, so that I think there definitely is something about holding people's feet to the fire. That was a very bad pun, but holding people's feet to the fire in terms of, you know, looking after themselves and actually pulling them away from their everyday life into a retreat seems really sensible.
Yes.
So, you know, what would you say to first responders who are maybe starting out, and if you think about all the things that you've learned over time and what you know now, what would you say to first responders that you would hope that they would kind of pick up on and implement?
So starting out in the emergency services, you mean? Look, communicate, talk about things. And I remember a time I had in Newcastle as an inspector, and I had a fatality on the first day shift, a house fire with 5 kids inside on the second day shift. We thought, but we found them in the backyard. We couldn't get to them because a 2-story house was just totally ablaze. And I'll never forget that. And then the first night shift, we had 1 person severely burnt and another fatality. It was it was quite different being an inspector because I wasn't part of the crew. I was separate and didn't sit down with them, have a cup of tea and talk it through. And then I found a week later I wasn't sleeping, and my wife picked it up. And God, with everything I know, but so that communicating, asking people how they feel, are you okay? And they'll do that back to you, and learn about it, read about it. If there's any training courses or anything on this, really get up to speed with it, because it will help you look after yourself, but even better, you get to help your workmates. And
And is there any particular resources that you've found useful as you've grappled with this over time?
Look, none that I read a lot. I always have, and it's always fascinated me what makes the human brain and people tick, and organisational culture fascinates me, and how quickly it can go from bad to worse, or worse to really good, and just, so I read a lot. But the organisations now in New South Wales, there's a lot of investment in mental health, and another good thing from Black Summer is a big injection of funds to fire and rescue, ambulance, police, rural fire service, SES, VRA, to support them in better mental health programs. So grasp that. Don't go to a chainsaw course instead of a mental health briefing. Go to the mental health briefing, because it will do you more good in the long run. You can always do the chainsaw course later on. So they're part of your skill set as an emergency responder, is the ability to have self-care and the ability to look out for your teammates, because you do rely on those teammates, and you need to look after every single one of them, starting with number 1.
Yeah. And, we sort of spoke about this, I think, when I was being interviewed. If you want to do the very best job for those people who are in crisis, you have a responsibility to look after yourself and each other, don't you? Because I don't imagine that you can show up and do your job as well as you could if you are not sleeping at night, and if you are plagued by these thoughts that you don't know what to do with, and you're not well enough in yourself.
No, well, great point. And look, one of the things I saw over the years was people who, subsequently found out were suffering badly from traumatic stress, could be quite reckless, and do things, and I worked with people, and it happened where they were just traumatised that someone was trapped, and went into situations where there was no way we could save anyone, but we ended up having to save them. Because they were just so, oh my god, they were triggered by the situation. And so understanding what it can do to you, and
consequences of not looking after yourself sound pretty awful.
Yeah, it's awful. It wasn't fun. Being quite an unhappy person, and dreading some of the things that inevitably were going to happen. In my work, it was it's awful and very debilitating. So, and I'm actually not ready to talk about it all. And I know you're not asking, but I'm still coming to terms with some of the stuff, and it was quite scary. So it's good to come out the other side and to recognise it, and also recognise that, yes, certain situations can put me back in a bad spot, but I know where to get help and how to get myself through that now, whereas I didn't before.
So is it hopeful if someone is struggling? Would you say that they should have hope that they can work through this and feel better on the other side?
Oh, yes. Look, my life is so much better. You know, my family are happier because they knew something was wrong. They didn't know what. It's hard to explain, but it's not controlling me now. I know my limits. I know the things to stay away from, but I can operate, and I'm happy. You know, life's good, life's great. So yeah, when that jack comes out of the box, it's scary and it's big and ugly and it bounces at you. But get professional help. The treatments these days are incredible. You know, eye movement, desensitization, reprogramming, things like that. Revolutionary stuff, and it's I'm in a good place. So, you know, if you're suffering, don't be frightened of getting help, because initially it's scary, and then wow, how good is this?
Oh, well, I'm so happy to hear that for you, but also that can be shared with our listeners. You know, that's a very profound piece of wisdom. Don't suffer in silence. Get out there. You can be so much better on the back of this. And it sounds like you were kind of walking around with a monkey on your back, and you've been able to release it, and the lightness that follows is not just for you, but it's for those that you love.
Yeah, exactly.
And so is there anything now, you know, that you wished that you knew earlier in terms of self-care strategies, practical things that you could have applied before you got to that point? Look,
things like mindfulness and meditation. Exercise, for those who don't exercise. So I've always exercised. One of the things, since I was about 10 years old, I've practiced martial arts, you know, quite a few different martial arts, and competed internationally. And but that helped me in some ways physically, but I realised the mental discipline actually kept the jack in the box for too long.
Interesting.
And so when he finally jumped out, he whacked me in the face. It was a big.
Do you have any karate moves to go back at him?
No, couldn't beat him. So be careful of that, because I was good at controlling my mind and my thoughts, and through my martial arts practice, and on reflection, it protected me at work, but it didn't set me up for long-term wellness. But I understand that now. I get that now.
So you need a balance of going hard and going soft.
Yeah, yin yang. There you go. So and interesting. I did hard style martial arts for years, and I got black belts in multiple disciplines, and I've given that away, and I do a soft style Chinese kung fu now, which is really interesting, but breathing and everything, and it's much better for the mind and body. So, and it's helped me heal. So yeah. So
did that take a bit for you to transition from that hard style martial arts to things like, how was it for you to take up something like meditation and mindfulness? The mere words of it, I'm sure in times gone by you might have poo-hooed.
Oh, the other thing is I've got old. So I know, it was just, my body couldn't take the pounding I was getting at karate anymore, and I realised that and thought, no, I've got too many aches and pains, and they're all gone now because I'm doing. But look, I needed to open up my mind more and listen to it, and listen to myself. So, that self-awareness again, and often self-awareness comes from listening to other people. What do they think of me? What do they see? That's a big part of self-awareness, I believe.
So the communication that you spoke about is a two-way thing. It's communicating in terms of sharing what is there for you, but it's also listening and letting land what comes back as a message for you.
Yeah, and acting on it.
Yeah,
and saying,
and
okay, and not arguing against it. And there's an old thing, you know, if anyone who's studied marketing, for example, I remember uni studies in the early 2000s, and when I did marketing, I thought, oh, I'm in the public sector, this nothing to do with me. But it was fascinating, and I remember the revelation: the customer's perception is fact. So if they think that the chocolate you made tastes like mud, can be the best chocolate in the world, but you won't sell any because. And so you need to know, you know, and with senior executives and senior managers in fire and rescue, 360-degree evaluation. People below us think, well, yes, we do, because we're ineffective. If they think we're ineffective, we're ineffective. So we need to know. That's part of self-awareness, is what do people see when they look at me.
So having a really good opportunity to hold up the mirror and listen to the feedback of others, not just in terms of your performance, but what are they saying about how you are. And so that sounds like self-awareness, but also the ability to not deflect those kind of things that you might kind of feel like you want to be defensive about, but actually really consider whether there's some truth in what's coming back to you.
Oh, look, exactly. And one of the, you know, things with a 360 is we'd watch for people to go, oh, well, they're wrong. They don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Well, okay, we need to help you and do a bit of work, because that, like in the marketing 101, perception out there is reality. That's how people see you, whether you like it or not. That's we need to do some work on that.
Look, that sounds such amazing, intelligent and heartfelt advice that you have given to others. Is there any final words that you would like to share with listeners and first responders far and wide? Any final words of wisdom that you'd like to give?
Absolutely. Firstly, thank you for what you do. It's just, I've been so privileged throughout my life. I'd watched Dad going off to fires when I was a toddler, and, you know, I fought fires with my dad for years and worked with the best people in the world, men and women who put their lives on the line for people they've never met. And it's such a privilege. Anyway, but thank you for what you do. Reward yourself, look after yourself, listen to the people around you. And if things aren't quite right, it's okay to ask for help. It really, really is, because you're essential to your community, but particularly to your family. So you owe it to them and to yourself to look after yourself.
What beautiful, beautiful words, and a beautiful way to finish. Thank you so much for your time today, for your heartfelt sharing of your own journey, and your wisdom and strong, emphatic advice to others about what might potentially avoid getting into those very difficult states of struggle that are so hard to retract, as you so beautifully described. So thank you so much for your time, for the work that you have done and you continue to do in this space. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much, Greg Mullins.
Lovely to speak to you. Thank you.